Hey guys, before we get started on the course and setting up, I just want to talk a little bit about what Django is. I also have a list of links and resources that I'm going to attach to this lecture, including a Django cheat sheet and some deployment instructions and links to the official documentation, all that stuff. So Django is a high-level Python framework, as you can see it says right here. So Python is a very popular general purpose language. It's used for just about anything really, including web development, building utilities, automation, machine learning, data analysis. It's used in so many different areas, and it's really blowing up now. And Python has a few web frameworks, but there's two really popular ones, really good ones, and that's Django and Flask. Okay, and they're both very good, but they're both very different. Flask is very low level, so I want to explain the difference between high level and low level. With a low-level framework like Flask, you don't really have a specific way of doing things. You can set up your application structure however you want. In fact, you could probably put everything in one file if you wanted to. You have very few baked-in tools and features. It's basically just a micro framework, so it provides some basic structure and some little bells and whistles to help you along rather than building it from scratch. Okay, and that can be a good thing because it gives you a lot of freedom. However, it also gives you a lot of room for error. So with Django, where it's very high level, you have a really specific way to structure your files and to write your code. And there's very little room to mess up. So I think it's really good for beginners. I think it's easy to learn. And not only that, it offers really fast development because you have command line tools for creating your projects, creating apps within your project, which I'll get to in a minute. Migrating data, so creating your database tables and things like that. So Django is very fast when it comes to creating websites and applications. It's also very secure. It has a lot of built-in security features. It has authentication. It has an entire admin area available to you, which you can customize. So there's a lot to it. And I'm a very practical developer, so I like tools that get the job done quickly. Okay, get it done right, but also quickly. And this comes from my years of running my own business and freelancing. And Django is one of those tools that allow you to build something in a month that would take you maybe 3 months using another framework, or even 6 months to a year building it from scratch. So that's why I'm a huge fan of this framework. It's also very scalable, so you can build really big applications with it. Now, as far as databases, you can use pretty much any database you want. We'll be using Postgres, which is an extremely powerful relational database. You could also use MySQL. SQLite is the default, but I wouldn't recommend using that in production. It's more for testing or maybe really small apps. But you could also use something like MongoDB. So there's really no limit to the database, the type of database that you can use. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the concept of apps. And I'm not going to show you any fancy diagrams or anything like that. I'm going to show you hands-on, but I just want to give you a quick overview. So Django has the idea of a project, which is your website as a whole. Your whole website or your whole application is your project. And then inside that project, you have what are called apps. So if you have, let's say, a blog on your website, your blog would be an individual app that has its own model, its own view, its own URLs file, things like that. If you have a store where you sell things, that store would be another app, and that would have its own folder. So each piece of functionality on your website, you create what's called an app. Okay, even for static pages, like what we're going to do, we're going to have a Pages app to handle static pages. So that's what I mean when I say that Django has a very specific way of doing things. And once you learn those ways, you'll be able to build your own projects very easily and not spend so much time trying to figure things out and debugging, because there's very little wiggle room to mess up. Now, before we get into the next section, I just want to show you a couple resources, and I'm going to include a text file with this lecture that has links to this stuff, along with some other things. But this is a cheat sheet that I created, and it basically has all the different commands to, for instance, install Django, how to create your project, how to create apps within your project, run your server, all that stuff. It also shows you how to create a virtual environment. Okay, you definitely want to create an individual virtual environment for all of your different Django applications. So it shows you how to do that. Then we have this gist here, which is on deployment. So we'll use this in the last section, and it shows you how to create SSH keys and add them to DigitalOcean, how to set up a simple firewall, do some security stuff, install everything, set up Postgres, create a local settings file so you don't share your database information and all that stuff with the world, and then set up Junicorn and Nginx. All right, and of course you can deploy any way you want. If you want to use Docker, you can do that. If you want to put everything in containers, obviously I'm not going to do that in this course because that's a whole new can of worms. That's a whole nother technology. But if you find that you want to do things differently along the way, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to follow everything to a T. It's completely up to you. All right, so in the next section, we're going to start from absolute scratch and get Python installed, and I'm going to do it on, I'll show you how to do it on Mac and in Windows.